How do you build a high-performing culture? This is Culture Architects. Candid conversations with extraordinary leaders sharing their biggest successes, failures, and lessons learned on their culture journeys. Here's David J. Friedman.
So joining us today on our Culture Architects podcast is Chris Powell. Chris is the CEO of Prosperity Behavioral Health. Prosperity is a provider of revenue cycle management services for behavioral health clinics. And Chris joined the team as their CEO back in 2024, but even the decades before that, he's already been immersed in the healthcare and healthcare technology settings in a lot of different leadership roles. Now at the helm of Prosperity, Chris stands out as a staunch advocate for intentional and sustainable organizational culture. He is a culture architect, as you'll learn. As we'll find out with him today, even in work environments that are as highly numbers-driven as revenue cycle management, culture can't just be an afterthought or an add-on. I'm really looking forward to discussing today how his leadership journey has led to this point and how he's translating his thoughts on culture into action at Prosperity. So, Chris, welcome to the Culture Architects podcast.
David, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here, and I'm a little scared because when I've had decades of experience, it makes me feel like, oh, we'll see. But yeah,
I know your experience informs where you are today. So let's just go back a little bit of history. I always like to start back. Earlier in your career, you were in sales, and somehow you got into healthcare. So, what was that transition? How did that happen?
Yeah. Well, I started out of college at this company, International Business Machines, IBM.
I heard of them.
As a sales rep. And I quickly learned that the value of what we were putting in front of our customers was actually in this thing called software, not the hardware it ran on. So I was fortunate enough here in Burlington, Vermont, to join a company called IDX, and it was a 100% healthcare software company. And I started carrying a bag in that company, and I grew for 15, 16 years there, different roles in management and leadership until we sold to GE Healthcare in 2006.
Got it. So that's how you got into healthcare. So somewhere along the path, all of us, and you in particular, I'm curious about, somewhere along that path, something happened, or maybe it was an incident, maybe it was gradual, that you began to have an appreciation for how important culture was in driving success. So what led to that? Where did that come from?
That's a great question. I think it's a little bit of both. I think meaning it's a little bit of both, an evolution over time and experience. And then I had a couple mentors that really helped create the picture of you can't do this on your own, right? It takes more than yourself and your energy to get from point A to point B. It does actually take a village. And if the village is working together, you can get there much more significant. But I will say that my personal experience was when I was a sales rep at IDX. We used to have these meetings after we'd sell a deal where we'd have to go in and we'd have the whole company in front of us. The implementation people, the development people, the support people, and you'd have to explain what you just sold. And sometimes those meetings were really contentious. And so I would always go into those meetings. I would prep the team before. Nobody was doing that, so everybody was very thankful. And I'd always bring Ben and Jerry's ice cream. We're up in Vermont.
Well, you're in Vermont. You got to have that.
Ben and Jerry's ice cream. So we created energy around a meeting that was historically, a little cantankerous between sales and the rest of the company. You know how that can be, right, in organizations. So I learned a lot just in that little experience about how people want to be part of something, they want to feel appreciated, and they want to understand what they're getting into. And it flows into a lot of things I've done since then.
Yeah. And, it's a good segue that you brought in Ben & Jerry's ice cream to kind of, soften the environment a little bit and make people maybe create an environment that was more conducive to the kind of dialogue and collaboration that you were trying to create. And yet, you and I both know, and I know you've written about this, and I have written and talked about it forever, that this idea that some people have about culture being, we get to bring our dogs to work and we have pizza every Friday. That's not what culture is. That's not what
culture.
we're talking about. And so from your perspective, let's for our audience sake even give some definition to, as you look at it.
Yeah.
When we use this word culture, what do we mean by that?
I was fortunate enough. I went out and listened to some of your great guests that you've had on this show, and the energy around quote unquote culture is staggering, and there's a lot of conversation about it. But you're right. I think we all have a little bit different definition, right? And I've sort of come to believe that strategy is what sort of determines where you're going, but culture determines whether you're going to get there or not. I listen to Simon Sinek a lot. He's big about trust and purpose and the safety circle. And I like your approach, which is about sort of daily behaviors and standards, right? You have to build upon it. And I think great organizations figure out how to bring those together. But, I don't think it's the words written on the website or even the values printed on the poster, right? I think, to me, culture is really the tone and actions that creates the energy that either the company achieves and people achieve or limits the desired results. I think that's my simple sort of way to think about it. Tone and actions and energy that either limit the organization and people within it or accelerate the organization and people. And it's not a feeling. It's like you said, it's not pizza on Fridays. That's part of the system.
Yes.
But that's not the culture. And if you design the system or architect it, I think intentionally, I think it accelerates performance. I think if you don't design it, it still exists.
Yes.
But it's probably working against you.
Or certainly it's at risk of working against you, whether it does or not. And I would say, consistent with your thoughts there, from my perspective and experience, I totally agree. Whether you've designed your culture intentionally or not, it is there. There is a culture in every group of human beings. And sometimes it works out okay and sometimes it doesn't. But if we go back to your observation that the culture has this enormous influence on whether the company achieves its goals or not, well, I wouldn't want to leave that to chance. I'd want to be a lot more purposeful about that, not just hope it's going to work out.
That's right.
When I think about what is culture? And I've thought a lot about that, obviously, and written about it. I as you know from your comments, I have very much a behavioral approach to things. And shoot, you were in the behavioral business, so I know you do as well. And I think about, it is the behaviors that people actually do that is what the culture is. And one of the things that I have said many times, and it's in one of my books, is that I think one of the reasons, this is just my theory, that one of the reasons that most leaders and organizations don't really know what exactly should I do about culture, even if they know it's important, but they don't know what to do about it, is the very definition of culture that we're talking about here. Because if you define culture, in my view, in fluffy, squishy terms, it's the feeling we get when we're here. It's the personality of the company. And it is all those things, but those, in my view, those descriptions, those definitions hamstring us. They handcuff us. Like, okay, your culture is the personality of your company. So go back to work tomorrow and start working on the personality of your company. Like, I don't even know, what would I do about that?
How do I do that? What is that?
I don't know. But as soon as we, in my view, shift to thinking of culture through a behavior lens, well, now I can do something about that. You're in the business of behavior change. People have been studying behavior change for thousands of years. This is not a new concept. So if as soon as we see culture as behavior, we now can roll up our sleeves and start to say, okay, well, what can I do about behavior? There's things we can do about behavior. I can start taking action here. Right. So that's why, to me, I'm so focused on the behavioral perspective of culture, because it's what equips us to start to be able to do something about it.
Yeah, David, I completely agree. You have to be grounded in the things that can actually move the needle, right? I think a lot of leaders, as you described, get caught thinking of culture like the weather, and it'll change and it'll evolve, right? And I tend, like you, to think about it more like an architect. Okay, what do we have to do to build the structures, the infrastructures, the tone, and the actions, and in my definition, that create the energy that give us the desired, results. And I think that energy is part of it. I think trust is a big part of it, and all of these things have attributes, right? Accountability. One that is a little controversial, I think, these days, but I believe corporate citizenship and the concept is an important attribute in a culture where everybody's working together. Clearly, reward is, and recognition, right? And I think another big one is fun and connection. And in today's world, you talk to way more leaders about this than I do, for sure. I would really be curious in this distributed workforce world that we now live in. Some of that's evolving and sort of swinging back to the middle of the pendulum there. Right. But that's creating cultural challenges and connecting and behavior. And people, they used to be able to see it in the hallway and at the water cooler, that behavior. Now I got to see it in a different way. And it's not bad. It just means we need to think a little differently about it.
I completely agree with that. And what I would say is not only do we need to think differently about it, we need to think more systematically about it. Because to your point, when the company was smaller and or was physically in one location and not remote or hybrid, people saw their leaders and they could be around you and say, just be like Chris. I mean, his persona, his energy, the examples he set the tone for how we do things around here. And I see him every day in the hallway. Right. But if companies is either growing and so they're not as close to you as they used to be, or even if they're not growing, they're just remote or hybrid, they're not going to pick up those cues from being around you. And so to your point, not only do we have to think about that differently, but my point of view, at least, is that we need to be more systematic because it's not going to happen on its own. We could get away with it happening on its own when we were small and all together, but it's not going to happen on its own when we're distributed. And so we better have a methodology or a system for how we're going to create that.
Yeah. Agreed.
So you talk a lot about trust, I know, and that's really important for you. And I certainly think it's one of the most foundational elements of creating a successful culture. And there's a number of books that are favorite books of mine on those. You've probably read Stephen M. R. Covey's Speed of Trust.
That's
such
the one,
a great
right?
book, isn't it? That's just a fabulous book.
Fabulous book.
He talks about the trust dividend, and I love the way he breaks down trust into, well, what are the behaviors that really create trust? Because sometimes I hear people say, well, you got to just have more trust. Well, okay, that sounds like a good thing, but that doesn't happen on its own either. There are things that create trust and things that destroy trust. So tell me, how did you come upon this not just fascination, but this interest in seeing how important trust is, and what kinds of things do you do to help to build that trust in your organizations?
Yeah, great foundational point. My belief. I think that trust is the currency that is probably the most valuable because it scales in a very different way and exponentially within organizations, either positive and negative, right? And as Stephen Covey would say, when there's a trust tax, your meetings get longer, emails get copied to 10 or 15 people, right? Decisions stall, strategies struggle, right? When there's the trust dividend, fewer meetings, faster decisions, more empowerment, and energy is more spent on building what you're looking for than defending, and I think that's really important. And, in companies today, speed to action is so critical to the competitive landscape we're in, with technology being what it is, with people remote like they are, with AI doing what it's doing. It is challenging a lot of those beliefs, and trust is, the thick stitching between that fabric. When I came into Prosperity, we needed to do some work around trust. There was 3 companies that come together. Customers were unhappy, right? And so I couldn't come in and talk about what's next and inspiration. I had to sort of rebuild, right? And rebuild predictability. And I think that really helps build trust, right? We didn't come in and talk about, apple pie and all that great stuff. We came in and said, okay, we got some challenges and we're going to get after it, and everybody matters. And we sort of built this pyramid as we think about it that I think helps build trust. And it starts with sort of compensation and benefits and that safety and security, right? If people can't trust you or be inspired if they're worried about their next paycheck or worried about, can I pay these bills, right? And then it's about, what do they do in the workplace? What's their job? Do they understand it, right? Do they know what's expected of them so they know when they're doing a good job, right? That's important to trust, because then there's a good connection between leader and the person that they're working with on their team, right? Or the person responsible for that function. Belonging and connection, right? What are we doing to create reward and call outs and sharing that brings people together and connections? The other area is growth, right? So how are we helping them grow personally and professionally? But all these things, and finally there's purpose and impact. It's a lot like Maslow's hierarchy.
Right?
It
sounds like a Maslow's hierarchy needs kind of thing.
But each of those 5 layers, we actually are applying programs and a systematic approach to trying to support those. And I think ultimately, that builds trust in the organization. And for leaders in organizations, the quickest way to destroy trust and erode culture that you're working on, I think, is to not be open, honest, and real with the teams. And that's really, really important. We had to do a reduction, and it involved, a number of people. And I said, look, this is, I'm going to do that reduction. So I got in the group of 10 and those managers were on the call, but I said, it's my decision, right? So I have to be responsible for that. And I think that's that's a tough example, but I think a lot of times people say, yeah, no, the manager has that conversation. Right. I think those things build trust.
Yeah. I think about that book and Stephen M. R. Covey's Speed of Trust, and I read it a couple times. Read a bunch of years ago. Then we actually did it as a book group discussion in our company a year or so ago, and reread it and liked it even more. But one of the things I remember from that, as he talked about the different behaviors that create trust in an organization, is that 2 of them that stand out to me, and I can think of examples of this, but one is the importance of honoring commitments. If you do what you say you're going to do, I trust you. If you don't do what you say you're going to do, I don't trust you. And I think about that. And I remember in my first company, I used to say to my sales team that one of the best things to do if you're taking over a new account and you want to build trust is make some commitments so that you can start to build a goodwill bank account of every time you say something, you do it. So you're with a prospect or a client and they ask you, can you get this for me? And you say, yes, I will have that to you at 2:00 tomorrow afternoon. And then you call them at 2:00 on the nose tomorrow afternoon. Even if they didn't need it then, it's the fact that you made a commitment and you delivered. And you start to build this history of every time that guy says he's going to do something, he does exactly that. That's how you build trust, because I know that you're going to do what you say you're going to do. And it's such a simple thing, but I look for commitments to make so that you can build the bank account of that.
Yeah. The bank account is a great analogy, because you need those, because not everything goes great all the time, right? And there will be withdrawals from the trust bank account, right? But it doesn't mean that account is belly up, then you're bankrupt unless you've done something wrong, right? And that really goes to what as I think about culture, the importance of accountability, commitment, accountability, the same type of thing, right? I think when accountability and doing what you say you're going to do is high and fair, I think trust goes up, right? But when it's selective and inconsistent, I think that's when it erodes. Trust, erodes. So.
I want to take just a brief moment in our conversation now to share with you an offer that I think many of you will find really valuable. If you've been listening to the Culture Architects podcast for some time, you've heard me over and over again talk about how we've helped thousands of companies design intentional cultures. That process is what I outline in my book, Culture by Design. And right now, we're offering listeners a free download of Chapter 5. Chapter 5 focuses on one of the biggest mistakes that I see companies make all the time, relying on core values that all sound great, but don't actually tell people how to behave. Words like integrity, teamwork, excellence, and service are important, but if 10 employees define those words different ways, well, we're not going to create the kind of clarity and consistency that a great culture really requires. So in Chapter 5 of Culture by Design, I explain exactly how to move from these vague values to clear, teachable behaviors that your team can actually understand and ultimately practice. You can download it for free at culturewise.com/free chapter. Again, that's culturewise.com/free chapter. Now, let's get back to the conversation. Everybody wants to talk about accountability. And in our process, the first step in our process when we work with clients is a brainstorming session with the CEO and senior leadership team where we start to articulate what are the behaviors that drive success around here? What are the things that if our people did these things more consistently, we'd be even more successful? And almost always just about the first thing that comes out of people's mouth is, we need more accountability. That's what we need here. We need accountability. And I'll often ask people, it's like, what does that actually mean? Like when you say we need accountability, if somebody were being accountable, what would you see them doing that you're giving that label of accountability to? And it's interesting, there's a lot of different points of view about what we mean by that word. So that word is thrown out a lot. And sometimes I'm not sure it's a particularly useful word. So I'm curious from your perspective, what does accountability mean? If your people are being accountable, what would I see them doing that you would say that's accountability to you?
Yeah, well, I think you bring up a good point because I think accountability made it to a lot of value statements, right?
Yes.
But didn't. It fell on deaf ears, right? So to me, accountability is commitment. Mm-hmm. It's doing what you say you're going to do, but it's clarity and follow through, right? And if we're delivering on those items, then we have a sense of accountability for the team, right? So, when you're, in our recovery phase, right, we had to do cost reductions and restructuring, right? Well, the worst thing I could do is pretend that everything is fine, and then that's not really what's going on, right? People deserve the truth, and so I think my job was to provide that clarity. Right? Here's where we're at, and here's what it means, and here's what we're doing about it. And then follow through and say, here's where the action we took, here's why, and here's where we're going forward. And I think, when the management or leadership or whatever term we're using, the leaders of a company, demonstrate that it follows through to other people in the organization and it trickles down. And that's when I think you have people, meeting their commitments and going the extra mile. But to me, it's around clarity and follow through, right? And I think, right, whether it's accountability or commitment, I think they basically embody the same essence of we do what we say we're going to do it when we say we're going to do it, right? And we do it for the right reasons would be the other thing that I would add to that, because I think some people do things and they're kicking and screaming, when they do them, and the output varies. But if you add, we do what we say we're going to do when and in the right frame of mind, I think that's a powerful attribute for a company.
Yeah.
What's your favorite definition of that?
So I tend to avoid using accountability.
Yeah.
Because I think it's too confusing to people. I think it means it lends itself to too much misinterpretation. So I would rather talk about the underlying behaviors that you're calling accountability. So in all of our clients, including our own company, we call them fundamentals, our behaviors, is honor commitments. And our definition says, do what you say you're going to do when you say you're going to do it. Yeah, and if something gets in the way, you communicate early, because I think that's an important point. I have another fundamental that we call follow up on everything. So it encompasses the follow-up part. We have another one about sharing information and being transparent. So they're I think that definition of accountability encompasses a number of different things. And I think when we try to use the word accountability, it's fraught with misinterpretation because everybody's different ideas. So I would rather not use the word and instead describe the underlying behaviors that we mean. Another example of that is I will hear people sometimes say, well, we need people to respect each other more. And that sounds like a great thing, but it means a lot of different things to different people. So I'd rather ask, what is it that you're describing as you're giving the word respect as a label to a series of actions that you see? What are those actions? And why don't we just talk about those actions? Because as soon as we couch it in a respect frame, it adds the risk of a lot of misinterpretation. Because to some people, I'll give you a simple example, some people will say, when you're late for meetings, you're being disrespectful. I want you to respect people's time. And my point of view is, I want you to be on time. I don't really care whether you call that respect or not. I want you to be on time. So why don't we just say, be on time?
Be on time.
As soon as we couch it in the respect frame, we add an element of risk that people might misunderstand that. So why don't we just get to the underlying behaviors?
There's I agree with that, David. Yeah, I agree. And I think accountability falls into that similar.
Yes, it does.
Accountability is a word that it can hurt right away. Because of how I'm interpreting and taking
exactly.
That, right?
So why don't we just say what we really want? I am asked often. We'll create a set of fundamentals for a client and we'll roll it out and get them practicing this stuff. And a very common question that I'm asked is, how do we hold our people accountable to doing these things? And what I've come to the way that I've started to answer that question is by saying, I think it's the wrong question. Because when they ask that question, often they're thinking of it in a penal kind of way. Like, how will we punish our people who don't do this? And I think it's the wrong question. And the question that I encourage people to ask instead is, when we fall short of these, how will we coach and support each other to be this way more consistently? Because that's what we're after. We want people to do it. It's not about penalizing them. We want them to live to this stuff. So how do we coach and support each other when we fall short to help us to be this way more consistently is a more useful question than how do we hold people accountable? Because that just has this penal point of view to it, to me at least. And I think just reframing that can be a helpful thing for people.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it's interesting because, rewards and recognition, I think, are an important part of a culture. And when, when you're talking about, changing the lens from the penalty and the words to the behavior we want is be on time. The behavior we want is X, Y, and Z. I think one of the challenges is companies struggle to be clear on what they want.
Exactly.
And the inconsistencies when they create a framework or structure, do they have ambassadors throughout the organization, throughout the levels of the organization to help continue to help that system thrive? Because a lot of times they lay it out, but then they lose context and leaders go their own way or managers do something different and they don't get the consistency that they want, and consistency over heroics every time. So reward is important, right? And if it can be consistent, is it tied to real outcomes where people can see they know what those outcomes are? Is it tied to behaviors, real behaviors? We have annual awards. We have all kinds of different rewards, but ones we have are annual that are based on behaviors. Right. And not necessarily that they did the most revenue or they did X, Y, or Z. Right. But they demonstrated the behavior that we love. Right.
Yes.
Are they consistent? And again, and are the rewards, I guess, specific to a degree, but is it clear to everybody why somebody's getting something? Right. And that kind of consistency really helps culture grow. I heard, I watched a little podcast from one of your conversations, and the gentleman was talking about fertilizer. You got great soil, but you got to have fertilizer on it. And,
Yes.
and that's culture, right? And it needs to be nurtured. And
Yes. I was going back to the conversation we're having about trust and the behaviors that drive trust. And one of the things that I remember Stephen and Mark Coffey talking about is transparency and the role that transparency plays in trust. And your description of when you had to have a reduction in force and you were the one who, as you said, you shared what was going on and why and what we're doing about it. That's transparency, and that creates trust, I think. And when you're, and the opposite is also true. When you don't share information, people start making up their own stories and they wonder, well, what's the real story? I mean, I know that's what Chris said, but what's really happening around here?
Right.
There's probably some other story. He's not telling us the truth. That's the opposite of creating trust. And so I think transparency is a big part of that.
I think when people feel they can be themselves, it's okay to ask questions, and that there isn't necessarily a bad question, right? That probably means you've got a pretty transparent environment, because people have had the conversations that are difficult, and they don't shy away from those conversations, and that's all part of transparency. And I think that adds to, like you said, building trust. Trust.
So how do you? Let's go to this thing you're raising of creating an environment where people are comfortable or willing to ask the questions that maybe in some other environments they might not be willing to ask. Certainly, to your point, that's an indication of a healthier culture when people feel completely comfortable and free to question, challenge, be curious about things, and raise issues. So how do you go about? Anybody who's listening to this would say, yes, I want an environment that does that. And if they were to ask you, Chris, well, how do I get there? What do you do? What does a leader do to create an environment that is conducive to people being comfortable asking questions, challenging, et cetera, raising issues?
Yeah, I think it starts with the leadership itself, right? And I think that not being consistent and not saying one thing and doing another, or rewarding. We talked about rewards and the power that can have if they're consistent, right? But a lot of times they're inconsistent, and a lot of times it's focused on a certain category of the colleague base, right? And that creates concerns. So I think it's about performance that is consistent. I think it's where you're able to have conversations with people that maybe they're uncomfortable, but you don't shy away from those conversations, where leaders do what they say they're going to do. That all creates, I think, an environment of safety. I think the other thing, that is part of that too, is that people in the organization that don't believe in the system, and don't support the framework for the culture, even if they're high performers, they stand out, and people look at them and they see what they're doing, and they say, wow, I guess I don't really have to buy into this, because Mary over there isn't buying in, and they keep Mary around.
Yes. And
I think that erodes trust and transparency quicker than almost anything.
Yes.
And so I think, good cultures put culture first, and performance is really important. But that if you put culture first and you allow negativity around that, and you allow people that don't support it at all and just perform on the outside, you're going to struggle. That creates an environment where it's not safe for people.
Yeah.
Talk, to share, to speak. The other thing, I do is I spend a lot of time I call people. I pick up the phone, I call team members, and I just check in. And, so in the beginning, that was really strange. People were like, wow, what, am I in trouble?
Why is it? Did I do something wrong?
Why is he calling me? Right? But it is really powerful. And now, people talk about their kids, and they talk about life, and then they check in, right? And I think more and more, in some instances, leadership is getting further and further away from the core of the operations and the people actually doing the work. And that creates disconnect. And people see that disconnect.
You know, I'm thinking about your comment about calling people and checking in with them. And there's a CEO that I met years ago, and actually had him on the podcast. It was an early podcast guest, who's a great CEO, and he's done some amazing things. He's a really good leader, and he has a very specific process of how his assistant helps set it up. But he has a series of calls. He's got like 1,000 employees, and he has a series of calls that he does all the time. He even has it's like a baseball card with each person and information about them, so that he's remembering things about them when he's calling them. But I remember him talking about this is such a great question, I think, that when he was in those conversations, one of his best questions he likes to ask people is, what are you looking forward to? And it's interesting because it really helps to get to what matters to people. Maybe they're looking forward to their daughter's wedding, or maybe they're looking forward to vacation coming up, or they're getting a new dog, or who knows what. But it's a revealing question about what matters to somebody when they answer what they're looking forward to. And of course, he's recording that just so that he can remember that. You have 1,000 people, you're not going to remember them all. But the next time he's calling them is, hey, how was that vacation to Vermont that you did? Or how did your daughter's wedding go? Or congratulations, send a note of congratulations or something. But I love that question as a way of uncovering what matters to people.
Yeah, that is a great question. It's completely disarming. It's very open and fair. And that's a great question. I like that a lot.
When we talk about getting people to feel safe to speak up and question, I remember Patrick Lencioni in one of his books talks about mining for conflict. And this is what I remember, at least of it, my interpretation. Some of the things I've read years ago, and I have a certain interpretation. Maybe it's wrong.
You could still pull those anecdotes
exactly.
out.
No, well, first of all, it's like something I remember. Oh, this was a good thought, and he talked about mining for conflict so to him, one of the most important things in any great organization is, he calls it a cohesive leadership team. When you've got a cohesive leadership team, everything works from there. And one of the elements of a cohesive leadership team is people's willingness to speak up and challenge and question and hold each other accountable. And this idea of mining for conflict that he talks about was, you're the CEO and we're in a meeting and with our leadership team and we're talking about some new initiative, and you ask, okay, is everybody in agreement with this? And everybody like nods their head, but you're looking at their body language and you realize, I don't know, Chris does not look like he's on board. The ability to speak up and say, Chris, I'm looking at your body language and I'm not sure you're really on. Talk to me about this. He calls that mining for conflict. You're looking for, where is somebody not saying something, and surfacing that. And then, of course, to me, the next step in this, at least the way that I think, is, let's say you were on my leadership team and I asked you, Chris, it's not looking like you're really on board with this. And you speak up and say, yeah, David, you're right. I have some reservations and here's where my concerns are. I'm going to say, great, I really appreciate you bringing that up. That's the kind of thing we need to do more of around here. But tell me what kept you from doing that? Like, why did I need to pull that out of you? Like, what was going on here that you weren't comfortable enough to speak up at the beginning? Because maybe I'm doing something as a leader that's squashing that, or maybe I don't know what else is going on, but I want to uncover, because I don't want to have to pull out of people that stuff all the time. You want people bringing it up.
Right.
So if they were hesitant to, there must be a reason. What is that? And just dealing with that, I think, is important.
Yeah, and that's getting deep into the system of culture, right? Trying to pull that out and create an environment where people do that automatically, right, as part of their ritual. A couple of things I've tried around that is, my group, leadership group, will make decisions. Always try to get input from people, right? And I always say, I'm going to take everybody's input. Unfortunately, at some points, I do sometimes have to make decisions, right?
Yep.
but it doesn't mean your voice doesn't matter, because it does. It's part of the process. But sometimes what I'll do in that environment, when we make a decision, I say, okay, let's all step back now. And each one of us give a reason why this isn't a good decision. And the reason I've done that is because it takes the onus off of somebody to say, I'm not really comfortable with this.
Good point.
Everybody gets an opportunity to, and you learn something every time, because even the people that were like, yeah, let's go, have to shift to a different mindset to have that conversation. And the other thing I've done, David, around that too, is in bigger groups, sometimes when I have the extended management team, we do the good old fashioned white elephant, right? Take this the yellow sticky note, which people like a yellow sticky note, and what's on your mind that hasn't come up today based on this topic and what we're talking about? What is something that you think we really need to tackle? Now, people, write on a piece of paper, we pull them out, we talk about them, but ultimately that's not getting at necessarily the right culture, which is we want that to happen naturally.
On its own, yes.
Right.
Exactly.
And so, but I think people have to, I think we've got that we've got to put some gasoline in that engine to start the spark. Because most companies don't operate. I mean, again, better than any of us, most companies don't operate like that.
Nope.
Right. And it's hard for people that have moved careers. And it feels like, to me, people are moving careers more than ever now. And changing jobs, it takes time to build the culture and system that you want, and you want to retain people to be part of that, and you want them to want to be part of that,
right?
But that's making it harder and harder.
Yeah, no question. When I think about how do you encourage those people to speak up as well in a more natural way and not have to pull it out of them, there's an interesting behavior that is in my company. It's in every one of our clients because I think it's so important. My own label for it, I wrote this many, many years ago, is we call it practice blameless problem solving. And so when we have an environment in which we don't blame when things go wrong, we just ask, one, we fix it. Two, we ask, well, what do we learn from that? And then third, we ask, how do we incorporate what we just learned into some process improvement that reduces the chance of making that mistake again? We're creating a place where it's safe to try things. And if things don't work, we learn from them and we get smarter from them. And if it's safe to make those mistakes and learn from them, people are more willing to surface issues and questions and challenges because they're not afraid. If every time something goes wrong, people are pointing fingers and want to know who screwed this up and whose mistake was that and who's going to be held accountable for this, back to accountability.
Right.
Then people just learn, hey, I'll just keep my mouth shut. I see a problem, I'm not even going to mention it because I don't want it attached to me. Yeah. And so you create a lot of negative energy when there's a lot of blame around. So if you can eliminate that from the environment, it does create a lot more safety for people to be willing to speak up because, okay, we're just learning. I saw something that doesn't work. Maybe I messed something up, or even I didn't mess it up. I saw something where there's a problem. Let me raise it so we can all work on it and fix it.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, it goes back again to I think foundationally some of that concept around trust that we talked about, right?
Yeah.
And in that, if people have this inherent trust in the organization that it is a safe place, they can speak their mind, and in fact, they may even get called out for doing that. We did that. The company Kristen and I work for, we had awards for people that tried things and failed.
Yeah.
Brought them up on stage and gave them, some money and said, look, this was a great idea. We had the innovation factory, we used to call it. And people just try, and whether they succeeded or not, didn't matter. Right. It was that they tried. And I think part of the thinking there was, is this helping build that culture? I can try things. I can speak up and not get have retribution. I can speak up and be heard. I mean, more importantly, I can be heard.
Yeah,
right?
Imagine that. Yeah,
it's not in a group chat.
Yes, as I'm thinking about your comment before about getting people to speak up in a meeting and acknowledging when they're doing that. I think about the importance of you setting the example of that too. So there's some amount of, we might call it humility as a leader that I'm sure you exhibit that tells people, hey, I make mistakes too. Yeah. And I fall short and I don't do these things perfectly. And I can own up to that and acknowledge that. That also, I think, makes it safe for other people to do the same when they're not afraid that Chris expects me to be perfect.
Boy, I will tell you, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think humility is sort of my view, and we're talking about culture, but leadership is, great leaders are humble leaders, period. Yes. And that humility allows, accelerates connection to their teams. And sometimes that's hard because a lot of leaders feel like they can't show that side of themselves, and they feel like it's, I rule by fear, right? Yeah. And that's not an enabler. That's not creating energy to create the desired outcome. So I think we have the Halloween, every Halloween we have the con, and I'm up there on the town hall in my goofy costume, having fun. And, that's, I think, part of showing people that that's the fun and connection part of culture. I think you have to do that. Yeah. If you want people to stay and build their careers and succeed, which ultimately helps the organization succeed, whatever organization it is, whatever type of company it is.
So one thing we haven't talked about is how you get the right people on your team. And what I mean by that specifically is you're building it at your company in a very systematic way. You're a culture architect. You're building the culture that you want to have. Not everybody's a good fit for that culture. And some of them could be good friends of yours and you could play golf with and do other things. And that doesn't mean they're a good fit with the culture you're trying to build. So some people are a good fit and some aren't. Not good or bad person, just fit in your culture. From a hiring practice perspective, how do you and your team identify as you're recruiting people? You meet somebody and you're trying to determine, is this person going to be a fit in the culture we're building here? How do you go about doing that?
Yeah, that's so critical. And it's really critical that, and this is a challenge, and it's a challenge for me in this current environment a little bit, this distributed environment, we're trying to get at it. But, with the people I hire, I'm looking for those attributes, and I'm looking for culture first and skill sets. You got to be skilled, or you're probably not in the room, right? But culture is the differentiator and how you react. And so, but moving that down the organization, across the organization is a better way to say that, across the organization, so that everybody's thinking that way, is harder to do. But in our space, we're a healthcare revenue cycle management. It's easy to think, oh, that's about a healthcare claim. And you're just pushing numbers around, right? Financials. And in fact, we actually don't talk about the claim anymore. What we talk about is the patient and the patient journey through the healthcare system. Because what we do is enable addiction treatment clinics and mental health clinics to expand and provide services to people that are working hard to stay in recovery. And when we do our job, they expand services and we help the patient move through the journey. Yes, there's selfishly a financial attribute to that called a claim. But we're actually in the process of growing our business to not just be around that middle part and that claim, but the front end to help connect with the patients to the right care. So that's an important part of our story. So that passion and our passion for that solution is part of what we talk about and we energize around. And you really get a sense when you talk about what you do and the impact you have versus your job will be X. How people react, and we gauge that reaction. And we have some interview forms and processes that, so we get consistency in questions around that, and that helps, right? And we have people feed that back into the mothership. I used to review all of those, and now I don't review all of them, right? And now we trust the managers to do that, but this is a good reminder that I probably need to reconnect with that process and make sure we're still doing it, because it's easy to get disconnected.
Yeah.
But that's some of the things that we do. And I think purpose and impact are important, and finding people that connect with that is an important part in our space, especially.
Yeah. So you and I could probably talk about this for about 4 more hours, but as we come toward the end of our discussion, one of the things I'm always curious about with anybody that I talk to, whether on a podcast or just socially, is I always figure anybody who's been doing something for a long time has probably accumulated some wisdom over time about whatever it is they're doing, whether they're the receptionist or they're a CEO. They've figured out how to be a really good receptionist. And there's probably things they used to think about being a receptionist that they now think differently now that they've been doing it for a while. So I'm always curious about that sort of accumulated wisdom. And so what's one thing, if you can think of, that maybe you used to think when it was the younger Chris years ago, you used to think something, and now that you've had some experience, you see that in a very different way?
That's a great question. I think I started out my career in sales and as a sales manager, and as a salesperson, sales manager, even a P&L leader. My responsibility was that sale, that group of salespeople, or that product. And so it was very my focused. It was very my focused. And what I learned as I evolved in my career was was a point in time. We and us and the team around you is what creates a great organization and great results and a great company. So I think the shift from me being able to control the outcome of things and driving to do that to assembling the right parts to create the outcome is the only way you scale. And I think the best leaders aren't afraid to very clearly articulate where they're strong and where they are not strong, and bring people in to fill those roles and to supplement a CEO skill set. CEO skill set's only as good as the people around them and the results that the team delivers, not what the CEO does.
Which comes back to our comments before about humility.
Humility, trust, and culture, right? I mean, if we create that system where people feel wanted, they understand what they're doing, they connect with the purpose and the impact, and they can grow personally, professionally, and financially. That's what I say to my teams all the time. That's the environment I want. All 3 of those attributes you can get here. Then we're going to go places together.
Awesome. Well, Chris, this has been a fascinating conversation. Again, you and I could talk forever, but I really appreciate you joining us on the Culture Architects podcast and sharing your leadership journey, because you've obviously learned a whole lot of stuff. And I particularly love and appreciate your not only your commitment to culture, but more specifically, your point of view, really as a culture architect, your point of view about it is a system. It isn't just we hope we get some nice people and we treat them well and everything will work out okay. But you look at this through a systematic lens, which is really what culture architecting is about, is seeing culture as building a system. And congratulations on the system you've built and the success that you've had. And best of luck as you continue that leadership journey. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, David. Really enjoyed the conversation and love what you're doing to move culture in the world forward. Thanks.
You bet.
Bye-bye.
And that wraps up today's episode of Culture Architects. If you're enjoying these conversations, subscribe on your favorite platform and also consider leaving a quick review, and that way other culture-minded leaders can find the show. And for more tools on building a high-performing culture in your organization, visit CultureWise.com. See you next time on Culture Architects.
This has been Culture Architects with David J. Friedman. Join us next time for more insights and wisdom from great leaders in all walks of life. To book David for your next event or to learn more about his writing, speaking, or consulting, Go to davidjfriedman.com. Culture Architects with David J. Friedman is a production of CultureWise.